It isn't easy for the average person to imagine that an animal, not to mention an insect, can think. But now both the European brain of Lady Leiningen and the primitive brains of the Indians began to stir with the unpleasant foreboding that inside every single one of those insects dwelt a thought. And that thought was, ditch or no ditch, we'll get to your flesh. Not until 4 o'clock did the wings reach the horseshoe ends of the ditch, only to find these ran into the great river. Through some kind of secret telegraphy, the report must then have flashed very swiftly indeed along the entire enemy line. And Lady Leiningen, riding no longer casually along her side of the ditch, noticed by energetic and widespread movements of troops that for some unknown reason, the news of the check had its greatest effect on the southern front, where the main army was massed. Perhaps the failure to find a way over the ditch was persuading the ants to withdraw from the plantation in search of spoils more easily attainable. An immense flood of ants, about 100 yards in width, was pouring in a glimmering black cataract down the far slope of the ditch. Many thousands were already drowning in the sluggish, creeping flow, but they were followed by troop after troop, who clambered over their sinking comrades and then themselves served as dying bridges to the reserves hurrying on in their rear. Shoals of ants were being carried away by the current into the middle of the ditch, where gradually they broke asunder and then, exhausted by their struggles, vanished below the surface. Nonetheless, the wavering, floundering 100-yard front was remorselessly, if slowly, advancing toward the besieged on the other bank. Lady Leiningen had been wrong when she supposed the enemy would first have to fill the ditch with their bodies before they could cross. Instead, they merely needed to act as stepping stones as they swam and sank to the hordes ever pressing onwards from behind. Near Lady Leiningen, a few mounted herdsmen awaited her orders. She sent one to the rear. The river must be dammed more strongly to increase the speed and power of the water coursing through the ditch. A second peon was dispatched to the outhouses to bring spades and petrol sprinklers. A third rode away to summon to the zone of the offensive all the men, except the observation posts, on the nearby sections of the ditch which were not yet actively threatened. The ants were getting across far more quickly than Lady Leiningen would have deemed possible. Impelled by the mighty cascade behind them, they struggled nearer and nearer to the inner bank. The momentum of the attack was so great that neither the tardy flow of the stream nor its downward pull could exert its proper force. And into the gap left by every submerging insect hastened forward a dozen more. When reinforcements reached Lady Leiningen, the invaders were halfway over. The planter had to admit to herself that it was only by a stroke of luck for her that the ants were attempting the crossing on a relatively short front. Had they assaulted simultaneously along the entire length of the ditch, the outlook for the defenders would have been black indeed. Even as it was, it could hardly be described as rosy, though the planter seemed quite unaware that death, in a gruesome form, was drawing closer and closer. As the war between her brain and the act of God reached its climax, the very shadow of annihilation began to pale to Lady Leiningen, who now felt like a champion in a new Olympic game, a gigantic and thrilling contest from which she was determined to emerge victor. Such indeed was her aura of confidence that the Indians forgot their stupefied fear of the peril only a yard or two away. Under the planter's supervision, they began fervidly digging up to the edge of the bank and throwing clods of earth and spadefuls of sand into the midst of the hostile fleet. The petrol sprinklers, hitherto used to destroy pests and blights on the plantation, were also brought into action. Streams of evil-reeking oil now soared and fell over an enemy already in disorder through the bombardment of earth and sand. The ants responded to these vigorous and successful measures of defense by further developments of their offensive. Entire clumps of huddling insects began to roll down the opposite bank into the water. At the same time, Lady Leiningen noticed that the ants were now attacking along an ever-widening front. As the numbers both of her men and her petrol sprinklers were severely limited, this rapid extension of the line of battle was becoming an overwhelming danger. To add to her difficulties, the very clods of earth they flung into the black floating carpet often whirled fragments toward the defenders' side. And here and there, dark ribbons were already mounting the inner bank. True, wherever a man saw these, they could still be driven back into the water by spadefuls of earth or jets of petrol. But the file of defenders was too sparse and scattered to hold off at all points these landing parties. And though the peons toiled like madmen, their plight became momentarily more perilous.